wasn't researching disappearances when I found this. I was looking into urban planning, specifically the development of public infrastructure in American cities during the late 1800s. Zoning records, municipal budgets, construction timelines, ordinary work. But the numbers kept leading me somewhere I didn't expect. Somewhere that, once you see it clearly, changes the way you look at every major city in the Western world. They built cities, not exhibits, not fairgrounds, not pavilions with painted facades and temporary fencing. Cities, entire functioning urban centers with electrical grids, plumbing systems, rail networks, waterways, thousands of buildings, some of them massive, some of them among the most architecturally sophisticated structures on the continent. They built them in months, and then they tore them all down. Every single one. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago is the one most people have heard of, if they've heard of any of them. The official story is straightforward. A celebration of the 400th anniversary of Columbus arriving in the Americas, held in Jackson Park on the south side of Chicago. A temporary exhibition, a fair. But the word fair doesn't describe what they actually constructed. They called it the White City. Over 200 buildings, 690 acres of designed landscape, a complete electrical system illuminating the grounds at a time when most of Chicago still used gas lamps, a working elevated railway, canals with electric boats, a sewage system, fully operational waterworks. Constructed, we're told, in under 2 years, by a team of architects who had never collaborated before, on a swamp. Let that settle for a moment. On a swamp. They drained it, graded it, landscaped it, and erected what multiple contemporary observers described as the most beautiful city in the world. More beautiful than Paris. More cohesive than London. A city that made architects weep when they saw it. A city that, within a year of its closing, was almost entirely demolished. Why? The official explanation is that the buildings were temporary, made of a material called staff, a mixture of pleat, cement, and jute fiber applied over wooden and steel frames, designed to look like marble, but meant to last only the duration of the fair. Disposable grandeur. That's the story. But here's what the story doesn't address. The buildings had foundations. Deep foundations. Some of them survive today beneath Jackson Park, and when engineers have examined them, they've found them consistent with permanent construction, not temporary exhibition design. The infrastructure, the electrical grid, the water systems, the rail connections. None of that is consistent with something you plan to throw away after 6 months. And the speed. Always the speed. They want you to accept that in 1891, a team assembled a city from nothing in roughly 22 months that rivaled the great capitals of Europe. In a swamp, with horse-drawn equipment and manual labor, while simultaneously managing the logistics of hosting 27 million visitors. The math doesn't work. The logistics don't work. The timeline doesn't work. Unless something else is going on. But Chicago wasn't the first. And it wasn't the last. London, 1851. The Crystal Palace. A glass and iron structure enclosing 990,000 square feet of exhibition space erected in Hyde Park in under 9 months. The largest enclosed structure in the world at the time. Disassembled and moved to Sydenham Hill, where it stood until 1936, when it burned under circumstances that remain poorly explained. An iron and glass building. Burned. Paris, 1889. The Exposition Universelle. Over 60,000 exhibitors. The Eiffel Tower was supposedly built for this event and was scheduled to be demolished after 20 years. It survived only because it proved useful as a radio transmission tower. But the rest of the exposition grounds? Dismantled. The Galerie des Machines, a structure with a free-span arch wider than anything built before or since in that era, simply taken apart and erased from the landscape. St. Louis, 1904. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition, larger than Chicago. Over 1,500 buildings spread across 1,272 acres. A complete city with its own fire department, police force, hospital system, and internal transportation network. Built in approximately 2 years, demolished within months of closing. Almost nothing remains. Buffalo, 1901. The Pan American Exposition. San Francisco, 1915. The Panama Pacific International Exposition. An entire city on reclaimed land in the Marina District. Demolished. The only surviving structure is the Palace of Fine Arts, which had to be completely rebuilt in the 1960s because the original was crumbling, supposedly because it was built of that same temporary material. Every time, the same pattern. Build something extraordinary. Open it to millions of visitors. Close it. Destroy it. Explain it away as temporary by design. But ask yourself this. What civilization builds its most impressive achievements with the intention of immediate destruction? What logic drives a nation to pour millions of dollars, the equivalent of billions today, into infrastructure it plans to demolish before the mortar is dry? Who builds a city and then erases it? The photographs are what disturbed me most, not the wide shots of the fairgrounds, though those are striking enough. The detail photographs, close-ups of the stonework, the carved facades, the columns with precise Corinthian capitals, the interior plasterwork showing detail that would take master craftsmen months to execute on a single wall. We're told this was staff. Plaster over frames. Temporary material shaped to resemble stone. But the photographs show a level of detail inconsistent with rushed temporary construction. They show buildings with interior rooms, finished floors, functioning windows and doors. They show infrastructure that mirrors permanent city planning, not exhibition design. And they show construction sites that don't match the official narratives. Look at the construction photographs from the 1893 fair. Really look at them. The workforce is surprisingly small for the scale of the project. Equipment is minimal. In many images, buildings appear nearly complete, while surrounding areas show almost no evidence of active construction debris, material staging, or the organized chaos that accompanies building at that scale. It looks less like construction and more like restoration. Less like building and more like uncovering. I know how that sounds. But I'm not the only one who noticed. Contemporary accounts from workers at the 1904 St. Louis Exposition describe arriving to find foundations already in place. Reports from the 1893 Chicago Fair reference structures that were finished ahead of impossible schedules without explanation. Architectural critics at the time questioned how such coherent design emerged from committees of competing architects who had never worked together. The standard answer is genius. Brilliant men working under pressure. American ingenuity at its finest. But genius doesn't explain foundations that predate the project. Genius doesn't explain infrastructure systems more sophisticated than what the host city itself possessed. Genius doesn't explain why you would destroy genius the moment it served its purpose, unless the purpose wasn't celebration, unless the purpose was documentation. Photograph it, catalogue it, present it to the public as your own achievement, then destroy the evidence that it was ever anything else. Control the narrative by controlling the physical record. Show the world what was here. Claim credit for building it. Then remove it so no one can examine it too closely. And this is where the timeline becomes impossible to ignore. The era of the great world's fairs, roughly 1851 to 1915, overlaps precisely with the period when historical records undergo their most dramatic revisions. Maps are redrawn. National histories are consolidated. Competing narratives about the origins of cities and infrastructure are resolved, always in favor of the version that credits contemporary builders and erases predecessors. The fairs were held in cities that were supposedly frontier towns decades earlier: Chicago, St. Louis, Buffalo, San Francisco. Cities that allegedly grew from nothing into major metropolitan centers within a single generation. Cities whose oldest buildings display a level of architectural sophistication that seems disconnected from their recent founding. What if the fairs weren't built on empty land? What if the empty land wasn't empty? What if the buildings everyone marveled at weren't constructed for the fair but revealed by it, repurposed for a few months of public exhibition before being demolished to prevent anyone from asking who actually built them? It would explain the impossible construction timelines. It would explain why the buildings had permanent foundations. It would explain the disproportionate sophistication of the infrastructure. It would explain why destruction was always the plan, why preservation was never seriously considered, why millions of dollars of supposed investment was reduced to rubble within weeks of closing. And it would explain the most uncomfortable detail of all. After every World's Fair was demolished, the host city experienced a dramatic building boom using materials and techniques supposedly pioneered at the fair. As if the fair wasn't an exhibition of future possibility, but a demonstration of existing capability, a controlled disclosure of technology and design principles that were then integrated into the official construction record, now safely attributed to known architects and sanctioned builders. The electrical systems demonstrated at the 1893 fair were supposedly experimental. Within 5 years, Chicago had one of the most advanced electrical grids in the world. The urban planning principles displayed at the 1904 fair were supposedly aspirational. Within a decade, they defined American city design, as if someone was distributing knowledge, seeding it through public spectacle, then erasing the source. I keep returning to the demolition photographs. Crews tearing down buildings that visitors had described as the most beautiful they had ever seen. Structures that architects openly wished could be preserved. Art and engineering destroyed on schedule, without hesitation, without public outcry sufficient to prevent it. As if the destruction was the point. As if the entire exercise was designed to end exactly this way. Millions saw these cities. Millions walked their streets, rode their railways, marveled at their electrical illumination. And then they watched them disappear. And somehow, within a generation, they stopped asking where they came from and accepted the explanation that they were simply temporary marvels built by extraordinary men in extraordinary times. But buildings have memories that outlast the people who walk through them. Foundations remain beneath parks that were once fairgrounds. Infrastructure corridors follow routes that predate the cities they serve. Architectural details from fair buildings appear in permanent structures across the country, not as inspiration but as replication, as if copied from something that already existed, rather than invented for a 6-month exhibition. The World's Fairs were the largest public events of their era. They shaped national identity, launched industries, introduced millions to electricity and modern infrastructure, and every single one was destroyed. Every city they built was erased. Every building was demolished or burned or left to decay. All of them. Every time. Without exception. And no one asks why. No one questions the logic of building paradise and then burning it down. No one wonders why the most impressive architectural achievements of the 19th century were designed to be temporary. No one connects the Kelkinti demolitions to the broader pattern of historical revision that defines the same era. The rubble was cleared. The parks were planted. The history was written, and we accepted it. We accepted that brilliance is disposable, that civilizations build their greatest works with the intention of destroying them, that the most beautiful cities ever constructed were always meant to be temporary. Because the alternative, that they weren't temporary, that they weren't built by the people who claimed them, that the fairs were not celebrations, but carefully managed demolitions disguised as exhibitions, requires us to ask questions that the official record was specifically designed to prevent. The fairgrounds are quiet now. The parks are green. The foundations rest beneath our feet, waiting for someone willing to dig. And the photographs, the ones that show too much detail, too much permanence, too much sophistication for something built to be thrown away. They sit in archives, filed under miscellaneous, gathering dust, just like always.